We good to go?
Yep.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to our July 2nd edition of the Onward Transitions Parent Forum. I'm Andy Durstein, the clinical director here at Onward, and I am joined tonight by Austin Melhorn, who is our clinical director, and he's normally the guy behind the curtain managing these forums, but he's actually joining us to talk about finances. But before we get into that, I wanted to give Austin an opportunity to introduce himself, tell you a little bit about his background and the work that he does here at Onward. So, take it away, Austin.
Thank you. So I'm Austin. I am the program director here at Onward Transitions. And I'm a primary therapist for a few of our members as well. So my work consists of, managing day-to-day operations at the Pine House, online, making sure, video chats are working and the G Suite that we all hang out in is working properly. I also do the financial bit of coaching with a lot of members, from basic budgeting to ideas around, credit scores, thinking about retirement accounts, and quite recently, even perhaps the idea of purchasing a condo. So we'll get into those things a little bit more in just a few minutes here. Andy, anything else you wanted to add to kind of the topic before we get going?
No, can you talk a little bit about your background?
Oh,
How you
yes.
ended up
Yeah,
there?
sorry. So I finished my master's in clinical mental health counseling at Plymouth State University, and Daryl and Tracy, or Daryl specifically, took me on as an intern. Right when Onward Transitions accepted their very first member, I got a chance to come on as the clinical intern right there at the beginning. Clearly, they thought I did a pretty decent job. They allowed me to stay on as a therapist and program director as the program has grown, and that has just been a wonderful opportunity. My job certainly consists of kind of everything that kind of might need to be done at this point, and I really, really enjoy that.
You do wear many hats, don't you?
Yep, and I might even seem distracted a moment or two here or there as I'm wearing a couple hats right now. So I guess to jump right in, so finances and budgeting, this perhaps more than most other topics that a family or one of the members at Onward Transitions will kind of be working on is more can be really, really different person to person. And the family situation can be so different person to person that it's really tough to provide any kind of specific advice in a video like this. But much more so, we can talk a lot about kind of the general ways we'll go about things and kind of the categories that folks tend to kind of fall into. Certainly if there are any specific questions, those are always great, and we love to field those. So the couple of categories that folks tend to fall into are, really are they pursuing education in a full-time or part-time way, or are they looking to enter, the working world, or, kind of something more along those lines. The member or young adult that is looking to go to school part or full-time might not be reasonable to have the same kind of financial expectations, or timeline as it is for somebody who is working on, getting a job, perhaps starting to work part and working on up to full time, and working on supporting themselves. And for that young adult, the financial piece can be one of the most impactful, one of the kind of most proud and perhaps most kind of concrete qualifier for showing growth and independence. And at the same time, it can also perhaps be the most ripe for contention between, a young adult and their parents who are still, helping and supporting them. Andy, I don't know if you want to kind of speak to, a little bit of, some of the wide ranges of kind of family experiences.
Sure. Yeah. So, on one level, we're talking about financial intelligence, teaching them skills. But this is very much integrated into the work that the clinical work that we do with them and the skill building in a number of different areas that our milieu coaches work with. Um, so, we're identifying, not just where is your level of competency with finances, but also what are some of the barriers? What's been making it hard for you? So for some of them, with executive function challenges, impulsivity and delayed gratification, and you know, being able to plan a budget, being able to plan a menu, kind of all tie into task initiation and again, all those kinds of tasks associated with executive functioning. So we really work closely with them to help them understand that there's a lot of different pieces going into this. Part of it is working with the families. This is one of the areas that we tend to work most closely with parents, because we want our members, particularly the ones that are working towards employment, to take on financial responsibility. So that might mean collaborating with the parents, by the end of the first quarter, let's say, to have their adult son or daughter start taking over maybe a portion of their rent, or taking over the internet payment, or maybe taking on their car insurance. So this really requires us to work pretty closely with parents and to help parents set boundaries, and sometimes have to hold the line with their adult children. I mean, other times it's pretty seamless, and these young adults really want to take on these things and are eager to do it. Other times, they're nervous about it. There's a lot of anxiety that's associated with that. So we'll work with parents to develop a contract that, by the end of month 4, whatever, you're taking on 25% or something like that, of your rent. And it can be a challenge for parents too. You're many miles away from these guys, and as parents, we worry about our kids. And so, sometimes we have to coach parents about, okay, don't send them that extra $50 because we want them to have to budget their money effectively. And if you're subsidizing that, they're probably not going to run out of money and have to face those natural or logical consequences of being short. So it does require a lot of integrated effort on the part of us as staff and clinicians and parents. So turn it back to you, Austin.
Excellent. And I will definitely touch on some of those as I go through some more of these items. So when we're talking about, the financial coaching and work that we're doing, kind of breaks down into financial skills, like Andy had mentioned, budgeting, planning, and there's lots of executive functioning skills and great habits that, are really built upon, or taken out of that experience as well. And then there's the kind of financial literacy category of the coaching. And not necessarily that one's more important than the other, but the skills and a lot of the foundational pieces there really come before a lot of the higher financial literacy pieces that we might talk about when trying to help them understand credit, credit scores, loans, those kinds of aspects. So I'll speak more to the skills for now. The biggest one, budgeting. I say this over and over to the members, how, budgeting, being able to budget your money, understand what's coming in, what's going out, and what it's going out to, is just the foundation of good financial health for the rest of your life. Without that, then you don't have, the foundation to build any of the higher level kinds of financial skills or literacy that are, really needed to, navigate our world. So budgeting, sometimes members will have really no idea. They've never done a budget before. Some folks have, some folks just kind of know that they're not, overdrafting their account, which is a fine place to start. When it comes to budgeting, I really like to start very simple. Encourage them to do, 4 or 5 categories of budgeting. I try to usually get folks set up on an app that kind of does some of the work for them, and then they can kind of check into it week by week. And for the most part, once folks kind of show that they're able to maintain a good foundational budget, we'll do a little bit less checking in on that unless there are kind of challenges that come up, so that then there's kind of time to move on to other things, certainly. And so some of the first categories I like them to use are things like groceries. And within groceries, rather than trying to come up with lots of different categories for different things, for groceries, I encourage them to put in their cleaning products, their paper products, their hygiene products, anything that they're kind of purchasing regularly that they'll likely pick up at the grocery store or at the convenience store or at the pharmacy or something like that. It just kind of makes the process of budgeting a little bit simpler, quicker. They might, some folks may need a separate cosmetics budget if that happens to be something that they purchase a little bit more of. But if their hygiene products kind of fit in that, then keeping things simple. Depending on if they have a car or not, transportation, at the very least, be able to track gas spending. Some folks are working on taking on higher or bigger bills like a car insurance bill or something like that, and then they might choose to include it in there. Or they're using Ubers and keeping track of how much they're spending on that. I've certainly found that is a category that can really, really just kind of run away with somebody as they don't realize how frequently they're utilizing it. Education, if they're taking classes, perhaps part-time school, part-time work, we might encourage them to include an education budget that they might, purchase their own books or something like that. Certainly financial buy-in is always a great way to get buy-in on anything. Let's see, what else? Groceries, transportation, personal items, an entertainment budget rather than many different types of entertainment, like rather than a restaurant's budget or a concerts budget, just one entertainment budget, just again to keep things simple. And then I always have folks put in a savings budget, and we include that in money that is coming out, an expense rather than an income or anything like that, because I really encourage them to think of money that they're saving as money that they've spent on themselves for later. And thinking of it as an expense in that way rather than putting it somewhere else. And we do tend to try to get folks to engage in some form of regular saving. I'm going to take $25 or $50 out of each paycheck, and I'm going to put that in a savings account. And if they're ready for it, encouraging them to have a savings account. If they're ready for it and it's something that the family kind of agrees on, having them open up a local bank account, if that makes sense for them and is convenient. So that's...
Austin, where do takeout food and convenience store purchases fall in that?
Absolutely. So I depending on what they've done or why they're getting it, I suppose. It might go under grocery if it's, I'm running late for class and I had to grab a sandwich. We might say, okay, well, let's call that groceries, and that's going to come out of your groceries budget. And then there's the entertainment, which is what most of it falls under. If there's not like a really good reason that they couldn't have planned ahead and gotten it at the grocery store or something like that, then I almost always ask them to put it in their entertainment budget. If they did breaks it up into a dining out budget, even if they're just grabbing an egg sandwich or they're, grabbing, a seltzer at Joe's Variety rather than buying a pack of seltzers at the grocery store, I usually ask them to put that in their dining out because the price difference is so different. And that, thank you for saying that and reminding me, because that is really the other category of spending other than things like Uber, the dining out, whether it's ordering out or ordering in or going out to eat a lot, or purchasing lots of small items at convenience stores or pharmacies. The $3, $5, $6, $7, $8 debit card swipe, that really adds up. And that's been another kind of really common area that we've seen folks really struggle to know how much they're spending and manage their budgets when they don't have that impulse control and they don't have necessarily the planning ahead and making grocery lists and seeing really how much different their budget looks when they're doing that versus when they're just swiping frequently at the convenience store or ordering out a lot. And that kind of leads me into the motivation piece, which can be really, really challenging, especially if our members sometimes haven't had a lot of financial expectation or limits set on them in the past. That can be challenging for them to have that just intrinsic motivation to want to spend less, control their spending more. So that's really where the family comes in and has a lot of say and impact. Because while we do work with young adults, we certainly encourage them to make their own decisions and work towards autonomy. But if they're not going to be able to pay their own way, we do encourage parents to, in consultation with therapists, set very clear, firm limits and expectations around how much money perhaps is coming in allowance or something like that. And perhaps there's an expectation that might end at a certain point. Perhaps somebody's really struggling with finding a job and taking the steps needed to do that. We always work with the anxieties and the executive functioning challenges that might come up with that. But frankly, a low bank account is a really great motivator to want to be getting a paycheck.
Yeah. We, in lots of different areas, we encourage our young adults to sit with the discomfort, whether it's the discomfort of applying for a job or making a social commitment. But there's also the discomfort of not having as much money to spend as I'm used to having. We really encourage parents to not give their adult children an open-ended credit card because we really want them to have to work at budgeting and for some of them struggle a little bit.
Absolutely.
I was thinking, there's so much variability in terms of the level of financial competency and mastery that our members have. Some need very little oversight, but there are others. I wondered, Austin, if you could talk about, with some folks, you set up a Mint account, so you're actually sharing their accounts and looking at them together with them.
Yes, we have done that in the past when folks have really struggled, perhaps with honesty with their parents or with us, with struggling to make appointments. And, frankly, there's often a lot of shame involved in that. And we really don't want folks to feel shame. We want them to, feel the discomfort and grow and learn. But, you certainly can't, discount the fact that, when somebody is not following through the way that we've asked them to, and is really struggling in that way, that it can be tough for them to show up, be honest, and be in a space where they're able to be productive. So we have a few times, in consultation with parents, because sometimes accounts are shared and that kind of thing, but set up a Mint account and then had the members share their username and password with me. That way I can see and help them with more real-time kind of budget control. I can check the account myself, every day, every other day. Don't usually check it every day. But in a frequency that would make it much easier to then say, hey, I see you've done this. I see you swiped at Joe's Variety 6 times yesterday. Do you need to go to the grocery store? And that's been productive in the past as well. And doing it through Mint allows me to see their transactions without having any kind of, access to their actual bank account, which is a nice layer of separation. Yeah. And before I go on to, kind of another aspect of what we do, I just want to kind of reinforce how foundational budgeting is and how usually important it is for families to, be really clear in their boundaries. Chat with their therapist, make sure that there's a really clear plan that's really helpful, for young adults' growth, as well as for us to help kind of reinforce those expectations and boundaries, because it can be challenging. Again, it is probably one of the more varied kind of aspects of what we do, family to family. And we do make a general kind of suggestion of $50 a week in allowance, upon arrival at Onward Transitions. This doesn't necessarily include, things like getting set up with some furniture and that kind of stuff. I think it's often a good idea to kind of set boundaries and expectations around those things as well. Perhaps providing, young adults with a budget to purchase furniture, and then really encouraging them to work with us to kind of help maximize that budget as an exercise as well in planning and managing money. And that $50 a week is should supplement groceries, a little bit of entertainment, and that's kind of it. It's really not supposed to be much more than what they would need week by week, with the support and meals available at the Pine House, and that was pre-COVID advice. The advice now would probably be a little bit looser, and kind of really working to identify what the member is in need of. And we found that $50 a week tends to be certainly enough to get by, be safe, get what you need. Especially if you're using the resources of the Pine House, which is another great kind of external motivator, is that by setting that boundary and that that allowance that is enough but not too much, it kind of does help to push the members to show up, push the young adult to show up, because they need that, because they don't have quite enough money to have a little bit of fun and get all the groceries they need. So they need to come to us, for that meal, for that check-in, and that's just a wonderful opportunity, always around the dinner table anyway.
Yeah.
Any other kind of ways you kind of, Andy, see how some of that base foundational work kind of permeates through the treatment process?
Yeah, I mean, often, the financial and spending habits really become a topic of conversation in therapy. You got a paycheck of X amount of dollars this week, and your goal was to save this much and spend this much on X, Y, and Z. And, what was it that influenced your decision making to, instead, really spend considerably more than you planned to on entertainment or ordering out or going out to a bar. So, really encouraging them to peel away some of the layers and understand some of the drivers behind their spending. For some, to use the term, some of it's like emotional eating. They're upset at night or they're anxious, and so they run down to Joe's Variety and buy some snack food. But really helping them understand the emotional aspects of their spending.
Yeah, and actually, now that you say that, it's interesting. You mentioned the food piece, especially because food's a primary comfort for all of us. It's a primary driver and reinforcer. So when you're feeling sad, that's a frequent move. And we have certainly had experiences where we have members who are engaging in overeating or binge eating. Really, a lot of food in a sense that it needs some clinical attention, and we've only found out about that through either apartment consults or through going through transactions and seeing how perhaps a spending pattern is happening, and figuring it out that way, and able to kind of address it and provide help, which is impactful.
Yeah. And a lot of this ties back into base wellness, so as we're helping them plan a food budget, for example, so you're doing some meal planning, and, one, we want you to get the most bang for your buck, and we want you to really be thinking about planning meals that are realistic for you to prepare, and to the extent possible, are healthy. So we tie this back into to a lot of the base wellness work that we do with them. Um, for some of them, you know, learning to prepare meals that I'm going to get 2 or 3 meals out of, and I'm going to eat leftovers, is sort of a new experience for them. And they like it. They're kind of excited to say, yeah, I made this meal and I've been eating it out of my crock pot for the last 2 days. So there's a lot of aspects of this that are also affirming for them once they start to get a hold of it.
Yeah. All right, in a little bit of time we got left, and I certainly did want to talk much more and focus much more on some of those foundational pieces. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other financial literacy aspects that we tend to talk about. So whenever we're talking about these kind of topics, I'm usually very clear to make sure folks know, I'm not providing advice. I am not a financial advisor by any means. I do my research. I provide kind of prevailing understandings, prevailing wisdom, impart a lot of information, and then always encourage folks to go back and talk with their parents, and kind of make sure that before any kind of moves are made, like perhaps getting a credit card or opening a retirement account, that the family's on the same page. Because until you are fully financially independent, your parents should at the very least be well informed as far as what you're doing. So credit cards, understanding credit and why it's so important, is probably, apart from the foundational pieces, probably the other thing that I really like to chat with the members about. And I can't tell you how surprised I've been with how engaged they've been in these conversations. We'll do things like look up credit scores, and all the time we're going over all the aspects of things that are included in your credit score. And again, I'm just always so impressed with how engaged they are in those conversations, how many questions they ask, and how I always end up kind of after the group chatting with a few folks individually afterwards with more questions that they have. I have generally had the experience that most folks don't really have much of an understanding of their credit scores, what credit really is, or why they need to know much about it. I certainly can't say that I knew any of those things at their age for the most part either. But they again do tend to really get engaged in the process, especially as they start to understand why it matters. Why your credit score has an impact on your ability to purchase a home, to purchase a car perhaps at some point, to get a cell phone. And as they understand the things that are involved in that as well, I think they tend to start feeling much more confident in their ability to manage something like that. Frequently, folks share a fear of credit cards. And frankly, I'd rather them be afraid of them than use one without knowing how it works. But ultimately, the literacy piece, because a credit card is not evil. How you use it can certainly be very bad for your financial health, or can be good for your financial health. So we talk about the ways in which you can use a credit card in a productive way that doesn't have you in debt, making payments you can't afford, at interest rates you can't afford. Understanding the difference, between what you're going to pay on a 13% loan versus a 6% loan versus a 25%, credit card interest payment that you may have. And the more they understand those things, the more I tend to find they feel more confident and ready to perhaps take those steps. We've had several members get their first credit card with us. Certainly get their first credit score with us, establish their first credit history. And those tend to be, kind of interesting, exciting moments for them, and certainly really kind of, adult milestones that I think they tend to feel proud of. Some of the other things we tend to talk about are things like retirement planning, the different types of retirement accounts. They may not be ready to do something like this. We've certainly had folks open up retirement accounts with us, but we certainly emphasize that there's certainly no starting too early. And we do show them, if you invest this much money at this age versus this much money, the same amount of money at a later age, and show them how that money grows in investment over time. Again, they tend to start getting motivated by that and going, okay, so could I start one of these? And I will also point out, we tend to try to really scaffold these skills as well. So if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I'd like to get my first credit card, we're not going to have that conversation until we've seen really solid budgeting and control and impulse control of money, and they're able to kind of show a knowledge of how a credit card works, and they have that thorough conversation with their parents. And I find that process tends to be really validating and affirming, and there's a lot of pride on all aspects of the family with that. Trying to think, Andy, any other financial literacy things you've kind of heard me talk about? I feel like those are the kind of the two big ones.
Yeah, well, I know you were talking with them today about taxes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so with the tax deadline extended, I readdressed. I always try to do a tax group around tax time, around April 15th. But with that pushed back, we had that conversation today. And with that, I talk about what they'll need to file their tax returns. You need your W-2, you need to know your social security number. If you want to file in person, you'll need ID. Do you have any other sources of income? Those kinds of things. Making sure that they understand if they're claimed as a dependent on somebody else's taxes. And then, we certainly encourage them. Sometimes families are having this done themselves, which is certainly fine. Sometimes that's just the most convenient, logical thing to do. But it's a wonderful skill for them to take on. We've done lots of first-time tax returns with folks. And today I was able to provide them a resource that I had found that pointed them towards all of the free tax return websites that are not always necessarily the most easy to find, and I found somebody who compiled them together. So I was able to provide that to them, because when you are really working on financial literacy and taking your first steps towards being financially independent, that $30 or $50 or $60 fee that you'll get charged at H&R Block or TurboTax for doing a simple return can be a real bummer. In fact, I think next Friday, somebody who was in the group today, I got to chat with him a little bit about retirement accounts, because he had an interest in that. Yep.
So, Austin, I think that, broadly speaking, covers it. There's a lot of nuanced work that you and Kristen do in relation to finances, but I think that's the big picture, right?
Absolutely, and yes, it is a broad as well as deep topic. So I certainly encourage everybody to chat with your young adults therapist, and see if there's perhaps something in that ballpark that needs to be worked on.
Okay.
Actually, well, there is one thing I wanted to mention. I recently had the experience of chatting with a member and talking about something that he was proud of and felt kind of on his march towards independence. He was just really proud of, and it was him taking on the portion of his rent. That was the first thing that came to mind, was taking on that portion of my rent. And it just made him feel good, and like he's making a real contribution and not just living on his parents' dime. He was really proud of that. That's all.
Okay. Well, Austin, thank you very much for taking the time to join us tonight. And to all the parents out there, whether you're watching now or whether you're going to take a look at this some later date, thank you for taking the time to be with us. I hope you all have a safe and enjoyable 4th of July weekend, and we will plan to be back again in 2 weeks, which would be Thursday, July 16th, I believe. So until then, be well. If there are any questions, please shoot us an email and we will get back to you. Okay. Thanks a lot. Good night.